Good afternoon. My name is Jeffrey Wolf. I'm e-discovery director for ZyLAB North America, and it is my pleasure to welcome you today to our webinar on a practical approach to managing public records requests. Our presenter today is Mr. Bruce Washburn, who serves as the city attorney for the city of Scottsdale, Arizona. Bruce has been the city attorney since 2009, but has been with the city for over 15 years now. Prior to that, he was in private practice for a quarter century, nearly in the area of commercial litigation. Without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Bruce Washburn. Bruce, you want to take it over?
Yeah, thank you very much, Jeff. And welcome, everybody. What I'd like to accomplish today is to go over with you what it is that Scottsdale has done to try and deal with the large amount of public records requests that we have coming in. We've developed a combination of factors that we think is working pretty well for us. And so I'm kind of like sharing that information with other entities that are facing the same kinds of issues that Scottsdale's been facing. So let's start by talking about kind of what's the magnitude of the issues that we have to deal with. So what is a public record in Arizona? Well, it's really easier to ask what is not a public record in Arizona. The Arizona State Legislature has passed a public records law that is, I think I would call very robust. It basically says that anything that a governmental agency has, anything a government has in its possession that either demonstrates how the government functions, or if it has informational or historical value, whatever that means, all of those are public records. And if you have information in your possession that is confidential by law, that's still a public record. Basically, what the legislature said is everything you have relating to the performance of the government is a public record, and if you're not going to turn it over to somebody, then you, government, have to justify not turning it over, no matter how obvious it might be. Social Security numbers, you still have to be the one that is able to justify not providing that information. There are some exceptions to what's not a public record. This actually had to be litigated. The question of whether if somebody on their government computer has sent a note to their spouse saying, I'll stop on the way home and pick up a loaf of bread, whether or not that was a government record, and the court said it was not. Actually, somewhat to my surprise, and that's true even if you have an ordinance or regulation that says that everything on a government computer is government property. If for some reason you have documents in your possession that do not relate to the performance of your duties, those might not be public records just because they're sitting in your office, although that exception is very rarely used. And then, of course, we have retention schedules. There's a state archivist at the library sets retention schedules for all sorts of documents that the government might have. And the idea is that once a document has gone past its retention period, that it is supposed to be discarded. Although that, I'm going to say, is probably happens less often than it should, especially with emails. But if you have a document in your possession that is past its retention schedule, it's still a public record. If you kept it, even though you didn't have to, you still have to turn it over. So basically, just about everything that we've got in the city that has information on it about the city is a public record, and that is a lot of stuff. So how many requests does the city get each year for these public records? Well, we get about 15,000 a year. And Scottsdale is a city of, I think our last census update was 238,000. And we get 15,000 of these a year. I don't know how that compares to other cities, but it seems like plenty to me. And out of those 15,000, the majority of them, about 12,000, are public safety. Some fire, but mostly those are those are police reports used by the insurance companies and sometimes in litigation. And then about another 2,500 are land use records. That's things like site plans and zoning maps and things like that. And we have a department over in land use that is essentially, that's all they do. They're in the one-stop shop. People walk in and they turn on public records, so they turn the records over to them. And of those 14,500 of the 15,000, those are handled fairly routinely. The police, fire, and land use do a pretty good job of managing those, even though some of them can be pretty complex. But that leaves about another 500 public records requests each year that are don't fit into those routine categories, and that's about a little under 10 a week. So it's a pretty good number of public records requests that have to be managed. 15,000 in total, and 500 that have to be given kind of special treatment. So what does the law say about when it is that we have to produce these public records? Well, the legislature has said that they have to be produced promptly. Prompt is not a defined term anywhere in the statute. And the case law on what is prompt has been, there's been a lot of it, but it has not been all that helpful. So the case law on what is prompt basically tells you it depends. And when you read the cases, you can just kind of see the judge sitting there saying, 2 weeks, I think that sounds like an awfully long time to have gotten that record out. Or a month, well, the month doesn't seem that long under these circumstances. So it's the kind of thing where you don't know whether you've been prompt until some judge tells you whether or not you've been prompt. And that creates an issue for the city in trying to deal with these public records requests, because basically we have two goals in trying to handle public records requests. And one of those goals is to keep us out of trouble, keep the courts from telling us that you made a mistake and you didn't do that promptly. And then the other goal is that our city council has evinced a strong commitment to an open and transparent government. I guess that's not surprising. I don't think anybody ever runs for city council on a platform of having a closed and opaque government, but our council has shown that they want to have open and transparent government, and certainly responding to citizens' requests for records is very much a part of that openness. So here's what Scottsdale's done. We basically developed a 5-prong approach to dealing with the public records. First thing is that, and this happened about 8 years ago, about the time I became the city attorney, and that is a new position was created, a public records request administrator. And in fact, the public records request administrator is in my department. It's been the same person for the whole 8 years doing that job. And I'll talk in a minute about what exactly that job is. Also, the city has designated PRR coordinators, at least one in each department, and some departments, like the police, have more than one, several. The city also adopted an administrative regulation, AR 296, and the administrative regulations are internal guidelines for the city, adopted by the city, and they're binding on all city employees. And AR 296 deals exclusively with public records requests. And then the city created its own, our IT department actually did a very good job of creating its own proprietary software, and that's for the purpose of tracking public records requests to make sure that they're getting handled and getting handled promptly. And then fifth is that for the really big public records requests, the city acquired some software from an outside vendor to help us handle the really big ones. And then fortunately, we're also able to use it for other purposes as well, e-discovery and things like that. But we use it extensively in connection with the public records requests. And this includes doing document searches and deduplication and report production. And I'll talk a little more later about all of the things that does for us. So let's start with the public records request administrator and what her role is. Like I said, she's part of my office staff, and basically she oversees the public records function in the city to make sure that the requests are getting responded to. And in order to do that, she provides training to all the coordinators on how the system works, just so they'll know what their duties are, how they have to fulfill them, how they have to keep track of what they've done, and that sort of thing. She maintains the city's public records request database. That's the one that I told you that our IT department had created as proprietary to the city. And she also coordinates multi-departmental public records requests. And she personally handles a lot of the high-profile requests. And the high-profile requests are basically the ones where there's a lot of media attention on a matter. They're ones where they might involve matters that are going to be in litigation or are already in litigation, or kind of the ones that are the hot button political issues where we know that the council members might be asked about them, or might be or would want to know what the responses are that have gone out to people, so that the council members would be as well informed as the people that are going to be asking them about it. Then the Administrative Regulation 296. This was a large effort on the part of the city in the sense that we started out knowing that we wanted to do something to regulate how the city handles public records requests, but it had to be something that worked and worked for everybody. So we started out by having a series of long meetings with department heads and people and then people from IT and people from my office who would be doing this on a hands-on basis. And it took about, I don't know, 3-4 months of meetings and refining and drafting and redrafting until we finally got something that people were in agreement on. Then it was approved by the city manager and went into effect. And in there, we deal with all kinds of things that anybody who works for the city might want to know about what to do when a public records request hits. But some of the most important things that are in there, it defines prompt. And essentially what we decided to do with prompt is that when a public records request comes in and it gets assigned to a coordinator, and I'll talk about that in a minute, it's the coordinator's responsibility to determine what has to be done to respond to it and to start that process and to make sure that that process stays in place. So prompt, and I think this is consistent with what the courts have been saying, prompt doesn't mean that you have to have the records the next day. Prompt means that you have to have a process in place for getting the records. And if it's going to take a while, it takes a while. And this works with the courts, I think, because the kind of the one thing that the cases have in common where somebody has been found not to be prompt, it's when things fall through the cracks. It's when the request sits on somebody's desk for a couple weeks, or it's when they have documents and they know that they need to be reviewed and they don't get around to reviewing them. So if you have a process in place that you can show to the court, look, we started this right away and it took this much time because it takes a while to do these things. I think that's a pretty good way of complying with the otherwise somewhat vague term in the statute. The administrative regulation also addresses at some length redactions. Redactions are very important in Arizona because, like I said, everything that you have, even if it's confidential by law, is a public record, and so you have to decide what it is you're going to take out and what it is you're not going to take out. And Arizona, when you count up the state and federal laws, there are probably around 300 laws that say you can't turn this information over. And some of them are the real obvious ones. Social security numbers are the things that come to mind. We also have a special statute on certain utility location information that's not supposed to be turned over, and a lot of things in between. And also the courts are very big on saying, if you have a document and it's got a couple lines on it or 3 or 4 lines or whatever that you're going to withhold, you have to redact that and turn over the rest of the document. In other words, it doesn't work to say, yeah, no, that page had social security numbers on it, so we're not turning it over. The court expects you to do the redaction. So having everybody know how to do these redactions or to identify that redactions have to be done is a very important part of what's in the AR. And then the kicker in it is that if you're going to, in fact, withhold information, not turn over information in response to public records requests, then you need to consult with the attorney for your department to make sure that the city attorney's office agrees that that information cannot be turned over. Now, working with the coordinators, there's a lot of the stuff that they find out. They don't have to ask every time. In other words, they don't have to ask every time, gee, should we black out this or should we redact this social security number? But if there's any question about it, if it's not something they've been told before, yes, you can redact that. Then they absolutely need to talk to the attorney in my office who represents their department to make sure that we're all in agreement on that, because those are the kinds of things that lead to lawsuits with bad results if you get that wrong. Or it leads to lawsuits with bad results if you get it wrong and turn over stuff you're not supposed to turn over. It's a very difficult issue. So anyway, AR 296 is there for all the employees. It's available to all of them. It's binding on all of them. The truth of the matter is the vast majority of them have probably never looked at it, but that's why we have the PRR coordinators. That's their responsibility. And this, I think, is probably one of the major innovations that the city did that's been just hugely beneficial in trying to get this right. And because we have 2,400 roughly employees and another 600 volunteers and all the board and commission members, and you count them all up, and we have something like 3,000 record custodians. And under the law, it's the responsibility of each one of those custodians to respond correctly to the public records requests. Well, as a practical matter, you can't expect to get 3,000 people trained up to understand and implement all of the nuances that go with responding to public records requests. So therefore, under the AR, each department, as I said, has to have one or more coordinators appointed. And, with the public records request administrator, that's her job, public records. With the coordinators, that's not their only job. Some of them, like in the police department, there's some that's all they do. But most departments, the coordinators have other duties, and it's their job, when the public records request comes to that department. And I would say that they probably serve as valuable or more valuable a function in the departments that don't get that many public records requests and don't really know how to, don't have the experience of handling them like the police department does. Because it's the coordinator's responsibility to know basically how all this works, and then to make sure that it does work in their department. And it's the public PRR administrator's responsibility to train the coordinators up on how they're supposed to do all this. But here's what the coordinators are supposed to know. They're supposed to know where the records are in their department. And that may sound like it should be a simple thing, but it's not. And I've done a lot of litigation in my 40-year career, 40 plus years in the law, and done hundreds of depositions. And I can't tell you how many of them you'll be in there and you'll have asked your client, now have you given me everything? I need all these documents. Have I seen everything? And then you're in the deposition and they'll say, well, do you have any photographs? And they'll go, oh yeah, well, I've got the ones I had on my phone. And I'll get outside after they've sprung that on me during the deposition, my own client, and I'll say, why didn't you give those to me before? And they go, oh, did you want the pictures on my phone? I didn't think those were really what you were asking for. Yeah, that's what the coordinators in each department are supposed to make sure doesn't happen to the city. They're supposed to make sure that they know where the stuff is, and if they don't know, that they make sure that the employees that they're working with know that, yeah, it's also the pictures on your phone that you took at the accident scene while you were out there, even if you weren't working when you took them, because they relate to your official duties because you still got them anyway. The coordinators, they're supposed to know where the hang files are. They're supposed to know who's got the PSTs on their desktop where they stash everything, because they don't want to keep it on their in the regular document system, and ferret all that stuff out. So it's a very important role, and we have turnover, and then it's up to the administrator to make sure that the new ones get trained and get trained pretty quickly, because you never know when a big PRR is going to hit. Then the city, as I said, has its own proprietary software, and this is how that works. The first thing that they did is the city's web page. If somebody wants to do a public records request and they go to the city's website, there is a page that is basically there for public records requests. And up on the screen now is the kind of the top half of that page. And I should start by saying that Scottsdale is an open data city. So we have huge amounts of city data that's available on our website, and there's lots of information that people want to ask about that they don't even need to do a PRR for. They can go on and, if they need to know, what the building permits are that have been issued in their area. Things like that are available on the city's website. But a lot of people don't want to do that searching themselves. They want to do a request to us and have us do the search, which is fine. That's their right. So they can go to this web page. If they just go to the city's web page and click in public records, they'll be directed to this one. And going through here, they can get to a form that will let them do a regular general public records request and find out how much it's going to cost. That's what the non-commercial fee schedule is for. They can also get if they click on this, they'll go to the city court records request. The city court is a slightly different animal from the rest of the city, because the Arizona Supreme Court told the state legislature that the statutes that they had passed for all governmental records didn't apply to the court, because the court's responsible for its own records. So they have their own separate record system. Fortunately, it's very similar to the one that's applicable to the rest of the state. So that makes it easier for us when we're responding to public records requests that include city court records. And then the next one down from that is the planning and development, the land use records, and there's a form for that, and for the police and the fire records, and the next one's down. And if somebody goes to one of those links, there will be a form for getting those kinds of records that goes directly to the department coordinator. Although the general requests go to the public records request administrator, but if they use one of these for the police, fire, land use, or courts, they go directly to the coordinator in that department. And this is a big help to us. It gets most of our requests in writing and on a form that we've developed, so it makes it a lot more routinized for us to be able to work with that. Then this is internal to the city, and this is what you get when the coordinators open up the city's PRR database. And this is really the heart of it, the add a request portion, because on here, whoever the coordinator is who's filling this out just basically puts in the essential information, who the requester is, what it is they're asking for, and any other pertinent information on that. And then a number is generated, and then this is used to track that request through the whole system. And you can also then do searches for requests. And I and the attorney who represents the Public Records Request Administrator and the administrator and a couple other people in my office every Friday morning meet, and we get up all the requests that have not been fulfilled that are outstanding for at least a week, and kind of look over them to see what's going on. And we can also go in and see which coordinators have requests that are outstanding. And the basic idea with all of this is that we can also generate tons of reports about what's going on with the different requests. And the purpose of all this is to make sure that nothing falls through the cracks, and also to be able to document and prove what we did in response to any public records request, so that this internal system helps us track and manage the requests, and again make sure that something doesn't get left undone. And there's been a lot of those Friday morning meetings where we've come out with Public Records Request Administrator being responsible for making some calls to people to find out why it is that thing's not, the request is still sitting on their desk. So that's how we handle most of the stuff that comes through the city routinely. But what do we do on the large PRRs? Well, we did an RFQ for software, and we also use the software we got for subpoena responses and litigation holds and e-discovery. But we use it extensively for the PRRs, and it does many wonderful things. It automatically OCRs everything. So basically, any writing, even stuff that's written by hand that's on a document, it'll now be into the system so we can search it. It finds duplicates and near duplicates. So we can eliminate those very quickly, or a lot of the near duplicates will just be something that somebody's forwarded to somebody else, and it identifies those very quickly. Also, it searches audio files. And if you get a public records request and you have an audio file, it's still a record that's responsive. And so we can search audio files and find out if there are keywords that are in there. So here's how it works. When we get one of these big requests, the PRR administrator opens a new matter, identifies the keywords and key record holders, and then IT searches all of their inboxes and sent items and everything else and puts it on a U drive. And the PRR coordinator, the coordinators are then also informed of the records that need to be found, and they're responsible for going through their individual departments and getting all those records and getting them over to the administrator. And then she scans all these documents in, puts them all on the same U drive. And everything's identified by a particular number. It also extracts embedded objects. So if there's an attachment, they'll take the attachment out and search it as well. And so then the documents are ready for legal review. And when we're doing legal review on these documents, basically you can look at them in several different formats. Facets, basically you can say, okay, of all these documents we have that are responsive, sort them out by custodian. So I can look by each custodian and see what they've got, or sort them out by file type, or is it an email or whatever, or who sent it to them. It just makes it possible to establish these lists of documents. Then you can go through and tag them, so that you can tag the ones like which ones are responsive, which ones are not responsive, which ones are responsive but need to be redacted, which ones are responsive but will not be turned over because the documents are privileged altogether. And you can do wonders with these lists and with the tagging. And then once you've got all that done, you can then there's a couple methods that you can put the documents together. You put them in a zip file and they're ready to be sent out. And here's my example of what this software has been able to do for us. When I started as city attorney, I was walking around talking to my attorneys and finding out what they were working on. And I went into this one attorney's office and he was sitting there turning over page by page a huge stack of documents. And it was a public records request that we'd gotten, and it had 30,000 pages in response. And a paralegal had looked at every page of that 30,000 pages. And then, and she had done the initial pass and identified some that had questions. But then an attorney was looking at the same 30,000 pages again to make sure that the paralegal had not missed anything. And my first thought was, well, this is nuts. There's got to be a better way to do this. So that was a public records request that probably took attorney and paralegal time at least a couple days. And we could, if we got that same request today, that 30,000 pages, we would do all that and we would do it better, and we would do it in a couple of hours. That's the power of the what we've got set up here. So anyway, I think with that I'm about out of time, but that's what Scottsdale's doing, and it's working pretty well for us. And I hope some of this has been of help to some of you.
Thanks, Bruce. For those of us who joined the webinar late, just to let you know, you can ask questions through the GoToMeeting webinar panel. There's a questions app. You can just type your question in there. And we did receive a couple of questions during the presentation. So Bruce, if you may, first one was, how much time did this automation save your team? Can you estimate that?
Well, I mean, I think the example I just gave tells you what kind of time that it saves us. I mean, what was a 2-day process is now down to like a 2-hour process, and it varies on each one. But on these big massive ones, and we get big massive ones, it's like it's an order of magnitude. It's like reduces it by down to 1/10 of the time it would have taken otherwise.
Fantastic. How are you handling commercial requests?
Commercial requests, of course, they're addressed extensively in the AR. And in Arizona, a commercial request doesn't just mean somebody's going to make money off of it. But the law says that if somebody's going to be using it basically just to resell the information you give them, then they have to charge you. I'm sorry, you have to charge them the fair market value of the information. And we do that on an ad hoc basis. You have to figure it out separately each time. But we do have a process in the AR for pulling out the commercial requests. And in fact, people have to certify when they're making the request whether or not it's commercial. And then we basically enter into a negotiation with whoever wants it and find out how much we're going to charge them. And I'll have to say, a lot of times they decide maybe they'd like to find the information elsewhere instead of pay us for it. So they don't come up very often, but we do handle them that way.
Great, thanks. Are people able to, someone else asked, are people able to use public records requests instead of discovery?
Yes, people can use public records requests instead of discovery. The courts have been very clear about that. Fortunately, the software that we have for public records requests can also be used for discovery, and so we treat them very similarly, but it creates a different set of issues. When you're trying to, for example, you can't go into court and get a protective order and have a judge decide in advance whether or not you can withhold information. You have to withhold it and then have the judge tell you afterwards in the public records context whether or not you did it correctly. But yes, we get that all the time.
Speaking of the software itself, someone had asked how easy was the implementation of the software for your team? Was it a lot of work? Did it take a long time? Were there any doubts that you had to overcome as a team?
No, in fact, the implementation went very smoothly. I was pleasantly surprised. I thought it was going to be very problematical. They were able to do it remotely, which actually is a big money saver, and you don't have to have people actually, pay for having people actually come here to do the work. They were able to do it remotely, and of course, there's always some hiccups and some things that have to be worked out. But it was really, from the time we started the process, the actual installation, and run the tests until the time the installation was completed, it was done over a couple of business days. It wasn't all done in 2 days, but it was like a couple of business days spread out over like a couple 3-week period of time, up and running, and we were very happy with it.
Fantastic. So there are a couple of questions in the queue around costs about the product, but I would encourage the attendees, if you have any interest or questions about ZyLAB, the product, that you visit zylab.com for more information. And with that, Bruce, I want to thank you for your time today. Thank you to the attendees. This session was recorded, so if you did join it late, it will be posted on the ZyLAB website under our webinar series. It will also link to it will be emailed out to anyone who registered for the webinar. Thanks again, and we'll look for you at the next webinar.
Thank you.